Dr. Mitchell Harrison's weathered hands trembled as he stepped backward from the examination table, his face drained of color. In 35 years of emergency medicine, through car accidents, heart attacks, and unspeakable tragedies, nothing had ever made him recoil in horror like this. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice cracking. Rose Thompson, 82 years old, with silver hair spread across the stark white pillow, watched the doctor's panic with surprising calm. Her son Tom gripped his wife Sarah's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Their teenage daughter Emma stood frozen in the corner, phone forgotten in her trembling fingers. The thing on Rose's neck, what they'd all dismissed as a simple bruise that morning, pulsed with an unnatural darkness that seemed to absorb the harsh fluorescent light, perfectly round, hard as stone, and cold to the touch. "What is it?" Sarah's voice barely escaped her throat. Dr. Harrison couldn't answer. 3 days earlier, the Thompson family farm stretched across 200 acres of rolling Pennsylvania countryside, its weathered red barn standing like a sentinel against the morning sky. Rose Thompson had lived on this land for 57 years, watching seasons change from the same kitchen window where she now stood, her arthritic hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. At 82, Rose carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who'd weathered life's storms. Her silver hair, always perfectly pinned, framed a face lined with laugh lines and worry marks in equal measure. She'd been widowed for 15 years, since her beloved John passed suddenly one winter morning, leaving her to help raise their granddaughter Emma, while their son Tom struggled to keep the farm afloat. Tom Thompson, 54 and graying at the temples, had inherited more than just the family land. He'd inherited the weight of 3 generations' worth of expectations. The farm that had once prospered under his father's steady hands now teetered on the edge of foreclosure. Bank notices arrived with alarming frequency, and Tom's shoulders seemed to carry the burden of each overdue payment. Since his father's death, he'd grown distant, speaking in grunts and nods rather than the warm conversations Rose remembered from his childhood. Sarah Mitchell Thompson had married into this family 20 years ago, trading her comfortable Philadelphia apartment for mud-caked boots and endless chores. At 48, she still felt like an outsider looking in, despite 2 decades of trying to earn Rose's approval. Her practical nature clashed with Rose's old-fashioned ways. Sarah preferred modern conveniences, while Rose insisted on hanging laundry on the line and canning vegetables the way her mother had taught her. The tension between the two women had grown thicker over the years, particularly as Rose aged but stubbornly refused to acknowledge her limitations. And Sarah worried about Rose living alone in the farmhouse's upstairs bedroom. But every suggestion of assisted living or safety modifications was met with Rose's firm, "I've managed this long just fine, thank you." 16-year-old Emma Thompson served as the bridge between generations, equally comfortable helping Rose with her quilting and teaching her grandmother how to use a smartphone. With her father's stubborn chin and her grandmother's kind eyes, Emma possessed a wisdom that surprised adults. She documented their rural life on social media, sharing glimpses of farm mornings and Rose's homemade pies with her thousands of followers who found their simple life refreshingly authentic. The old farmhouse itself seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the financial pressures and family tensions that simmered beneath its creaking floorboards. Foreclosure loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, threatening to scatter this family like dandelion seeds in the wind. Medical bills from John's final illness still arrived sporadically, and Tom's pride prevented him from accepting help from Sarah's more affluent family in the city. None of them could have imagined that within 72 hours, their quiet struggles would explode into a media circus that would change everything they thought they knew about family, faith, and the mysterious ways that love can triumph over fear. Tuesday morning arrived with the crisp bite of late autumn. frost coating the farmhouse windows like delicate lace. Sarah woke at her usual 6 o'clock, the old house creaking around her as Tom dressed quietly in the darkness. She padded downstairs in her slippers, expecting to find Rose already in the kitchen with coffee brewing and bacon sizzling, the same morning ritual they'd shared for 20 years. Instead, she found Rose crumpled on the linoleum floor beside the overturned kitchen chair, her pale blue nightgown twisted around her frail frame. Sarah's heart lurched as she dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she reached for Rose's wrist to check her pulse. "Rose? Rose? Can you hear me?" Sarah's voice cracked with panic as she felt the steady, reassuring beat beneath Rose's papery skin. Rose's eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly, confusion clouding her usually sharp gray eyes. "Oh my," Rose murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "What happened?" I was making coffee for Tom." She tried to sit up, but Sarah gently pressed her shoulders back down. "Don't move, Mom. Just stay still." The endearment slipped out naturally, something Sarah rarely called her mother-in-law. As she helped Rose into a sitting position against the kitchen cabinets, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach clench with dread. On the left side of Rose's neck, just below her ear, was a mark unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Perfectly round, about the size of a silver dollar, it was black as coal and seemed to absorb the morning light filtering through the curtains. When Sarah tentatively touched it, Rose didn't flinch. She didn't seem to feel it at all. The mark was hard beneath Sarah's fingertips, like touching a stone embedded in flesh. "Rose, honey, do you remember falling? Do you remember hitting your neck on anything?" Sarah kept her voice calm, though her mind was racing. Rose's hand moved slowly to touch the spot, her fingers exploring the strange mark with the same confusion Sarah felt. "I don't remember falling at all. The last thing I recall was taking my evening pills and going to bed. Honey, I feel fine except for being a bit dizzy. Maybe I just got up too fast." The sound of Tom's work boots on the stairs made Sarah look up with relief. "Tom, come here, please. Your mother had a fall." Tom took one look at his mother on the floor, and his face went white. He'd lost his father so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that any sign of his mother's mortality sent ice through his veins. "Should I call 911? "I'm fine, son," Rose protested, though she accepted Tom's strong arms helping her to her feet. "Just a little stumble. Happens to the best of us at my age." But Sarah couldn't stop staring at the mark on Rose's neck. In the better light of the kitchen overhead fixture, it looked even more unnatural. "Tom, look at this." "Have you ever seen anything like it?" Tom peered at his mother's neck, his expression growing troubled. "Mom, that doesn't look like a bruise from a fall. It's too perfectly round. And it's so dark." "Maybe I bumped it on the cabinet door," Rose suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. She moved to the mirror hanging by the kitchen door, craning her neck to see the mark. Her face went pale. "Well, that is peculiar, isn't it?" Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, drawn by the unusual commotion. "What's wrong? Is Grandma okay?" When she saw the mark on Rose's neck, her teenage composure cracked. "Oh my God, Grandma, what is that thing?" "Language, Emma," Rose said automatically, but her heart wasn't in the correction. Sarah found herself caught between practicality and worry. The family couldn't afford another medical emergency. Tom's insurance from his part-time job at the feed store barely covered basics, and Rose's Medicare had co-pays that already strained their budget. But the mark looked so wrong, so unnatural, that every maternal instinct Sarah possessed was screaming that something was seriously amiss. "I think we should at least call Dr. Peterson," Sarah said carefully, referring to the family physician who'd been treating the Thompsons for decades. "It's probably nothing," Tom said, but Sarah could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Dr. Peterson's probably booked solid anyway." "Then we go to urgent care," Sarah insisted. "Rose, you said you feel fine, but this mark, it just appeared overnight. That's not normal." Rose sank into her favorite kitchen chair, suddenly looking every one of her 82 years. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to have someone take a look. Though I hate to make a fuss over what's probably nothing." Emma, meanwhile, had pulled out her phone and was typing rapidly. "I'm posting on my story to ask people to pray for you, Grandma. #pray for Grandma Rose." "Honey, that's sweet, but there's no need," Rose began. "Too late," Emma said with a small smile. "Already posted. My followers love you." None of them realized that this simple social media post would be the spark that ignited a firestorm of attention they could never have imagined. The drive to Mercy General Hospital took 45 minutes through winding country roads, with Sarah gripping the steering wheel while Tom sat in the back with his mother. Rose had insisted she felt well enough to sit up, but the strange mark on her neck seemed to have darkened during the car ride, if such a thing were possible. "You know, I've been thinking," Rose said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "My grandmother used to tell stories about marks that appeared on folks back in the old country. Said they were signs of, well, never mind what she said. Old superstitions." Sarah caught Tom's worried glance in the rearview mirror. Rose rarely spoke about her Pennsylvania Dutch heritage, and never about old superstitions. The fact that she was reaching back to childhood memories suggested she was more concerned than she was letting on. Mercy General's emergency room buzzed with the usual Tuesday afternoon chaos: crying children, anxious families, and the antiseptic smell that seemed to permeate every hospital corridor. The triage nurse, a tired-looking woman named Janet, took one look at Rose's neck and immediately moved them to the front of the line. "Dr. Harrison will see you right away," Janet said, her professional demeanor not quite masking her concern. Room 7. Dr. Mitchell Harrison had been practicing emergency medicine at Mercy General for over 3 decades. At 58, he'd seen everything from farm accidents to heart attacks and pride himself on maintaining his composure in even the most challenging situations. He'd recently been battling his own demons. A malpractice lawsuit from a family who blamed him for their father's death had shaken his confidence and made him question every decision. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Dr. Harrison," he said, entering the examination room with his characteristic calm professionalism. "I understand you had a fall this morning and there's some concern about bruising." Rose sat on the examination table looking remarkably composed for an 82-year-old woman. "That's right, doctor. Though I have to say I don't remember the fall itself. Just woke up on the kitchen floor." Dr. Harrison nodded, making notes on his chart. Memory loss with falls was common in elderly patients. "Let's take a look at what we're dealing with." He moved toward Rose, expecting to see the typical purpling and swelling of a standard hematoma. What he saw instead made him stop mid-step. The mark on Rose's neck was unlike anything in his medical experience. Perfectly circular, approximately 3 inches in diameter, it was so black it seemed to absorb the harsh fluorescent lights of the examination room. The edges were sharply defined, as if someone had drawn a perfect circle with ink that had somehow penetrated beneath the skin. "That's unusual," Dr. Harrison murmured, pulling on latex gloves. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to examine this more closely. Please let me know if you feel any pain or discomfort." He reached toward Rose's neck with the confidence of someone who had performed thousands of similar examinations. The moment his gloved fingers made contact with the mark, Dr. Harrison's world shifted on its axis. The mark was ice cold, not just cool like compromised circulation, but genuinely frigid, as if Rose's body temperature had plummeted to near freezing in that one spot. More disturbing was the texture. It felt exactly like stone. Not the soft give of swollen tissue or the firmness of a blood clot, but the unyielding hardness of granite. Dr. Harrison jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned, his professional composure cracking. This isn't. He stared at his gloved fingers, half expecting to see frost on them. Doctor? Sarah's voice was tight with anxiety. What is it? What's wrong? Dr. Harrison couldn't answer immediately. In 35 years of medicine, through medical school, residency, and decades of practice, he had never encountered anything that defied basic biological principles like this. Human tissue simply did not behave this way. I need to consult with a colleague, he said, backing toward the door. His hands were actually shaking, something that hadn't happened since his first year of residency. Please wait here. Don't leave the room. Tom stood up from his chair, alarm evident on his weathered face. Doc, you're scaring us. What's wrong with my mother? But Dr. Harrison was already out the door, his footsteps rapid as he headed for the nurse's station. Sarah heard him speaking in urgent, hushed tones to the head nurse, catching fragments. Never seen anything like it, and need infectious disease protocol. Within minutes, the hallway outside their room filled with activity. A code team assembled, even though no code had been called. The infectious disease specialist, Dr. Amanda Chen, arrived with unusual haste for a consultation. Behind her came Dr. Robert Martinez from oncology and Dr. Susan Walsh from dermatology. What's happening? Emma whispered, having arrived with Tom's permission after posting updates to her increasingly worried social media followers. Why are there so many doctors? Rose, remarkably, seemed the calmest person in the room. Well, I suppose I've given them something to puzzle over, she said with the dry humor that had carried her through 8 decades of life. Your grandfather always said I was one of a kind. Dr. Harrison returned with the team of specialists, his face grave. Mrs. Thompson, we're going to need to run some tests, extensive tests. This mark, it's unlike anything we've encountered before, and we need to understand what we're dealing with. Are you saying you don't know what it is? Sarah asked, her voice rising with each word. You're doctors. You're supposed to know. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her manner gentle but serious. Mrs. Thompson, in medicine, we occasionally encounter conditions that are extremely rare. What's important right now is that you seem to be feeling well, and we're going to do everything we can to understand what's happening. Through the examination room's small window, Sarah could see more medical staff gathering in the hallway. Someone had called administration. Security guards had appeared. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted from routine medical care to something that felt much more serious and frightening. I think, Rose said quietly, that this is going to be a very long day. Outside in the parking lot, Emma's phone buzzed with notifications. Her simple prayer request had been shared hundreds of times, and Hat Pray for Grandma Rose was beginning to trend locally. The attention she'd hoped might bring comfort to her family was about to bring something else entirely. By Tuesday evening, the peaceful corridors of Mercy General Hospital had transformed into something resembling a media circus. Emma's innocent social media post had been shared over 2,000 times within 6 hours, and Hat Pray for Grandma Rose was trending across 3 states. What had started as a granddaughter's plea for prayers had somehow captured the imagination of thousands of strangers who found themselves invested in the fate of an elderly farm woman they'd never met. The hospital parking lot filled with news vans from local television stations. Channel 7's weekend anchor, desperate for a story that might boost her to the weekday slot, had picked up on the trending hashtag and arrived with a full camera crew. Behind her came reporters from competing stations, each hoping to break the story of the medical mystery that has doctors baffled. Inside the hospital, Dr. Harrison stood in Administrator Patricia Woolworth's office, running his hands through his graying hair as he tried to explain the unexplainable. "Patricia, I've been practicing medicine for 35 years. I've seen everything from rare tropical diseases to bizarre industrial accidents. But this—" He gestured helplessly toward the window where they could see the growing crowd of media personnel. "This defies every principle of human physiology I understand." Patricia Woolworth had been managing Mercy General's public relations for over a decade, but nothing had prepared her for the current situation. Her phone rang constantly with requests for interviews, statements, and medical explanations that simply didn't exist. "Mitchell, I need you to give me something, anything. The media is demanding answers, and we don't know isn't going to satisfy them much longer." Meanwhile, in room 7, the Thompson family found themselves under an informal quarantine that no one would officially acknowledge. Dr. Chen had gently suggested that it would be prudent for them to remain in the hospital while the medical team ran their tests. But when Tom had tried to step outside for some fresh air, a security guard had politely redirected him back to the room. "This is getting out of hand," Tom muttered, pacing the small space like a caged animal. His worry about his mother was being compounded by anxiety about the farm. The evening chores weren't going to do themselves, and he'd already missed a crucial meeting with the bank about their loan extension. Sarah sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, her phone buzzing incessantly with calls from reporters who had somehow obtained her number. "Tom, look at this," she said, showing him Emma's TikTok account. "She has 50,000 new followers since this morning. 50,000. People are sending money for your mother's medical bills, sending prayers, sharing their own stories." Emma, curled up in the corner chair with her legs tucked under her, scrolled through hundreds of comments on her posts. "Listen to this one, Grandma. My own grandmother had something similar happen in Ireland back in the 1940s. The doctors there said it was a blessing, not a curse." And this one: "Praying for your sweet grandmother. She looks like such an angel." Rose, the center of all this attention, sat remarkably calm in her hospital bed. She'd been poked and prodded by more doctors in one afternoon than she'd seen in the previous 5 years combined. Blood had been drawn, X-rays taken, and countless photographs captured of the mysterious mark that continued to defy medical explanation. Through it all, she maintained the quiet dignity that had carried her through 8 decades of life's ups and downs. "You know," Rose said thoughtfully, "I keep thinking about something my grandmother told me when I was about Emma's age. She said that sometimes God gives us burdens that look like troubles, but are really blessings in disguise. Sei still und wisse," she used to say. "Be still and know." Outside their room, the medical team was anything but still. Dr. Chen had called in favors from colleagues at Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic, sending photographs and test results to some of the most brilliant medical minds in the country. The responses were uniformly baffling. Dr. Elizabeth Montgomery, a renowned specialist in rare diseases at Johns Hopkins, had replied simply, "In 40 years of medicine, I have never seen anything remotely similar." The mark itself had become the subject of intense scrutiny. High-resolution photographs revealed that its edges were so perfectly defined they appeared to have been drawn with a compass. The blackness was absolute. Imaging equipment couldn't penetrate its surface to reveal what lay beneath. Most disturbing to the medical team was the temperature differential. While Rose's body temperature remained normal at 98.6 degrees, the mark itself registered at a constant 89 degrees, as if that particular area of her body existed in a different physical state. By Wednesday morning, the story had gone national. Good Morning America's medical correspondent, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, did a remote segment from the hospital parking lot, interviewing local townspeople who had driven over to show their support. The segment opened with Emma's original TikTok post and featured interviews with neighbors who described Rose as the sweetest woman you'd ever want to meet and someone who's helped half the county through hard times. Tom watched the broadcast from the hospital cafeteria, his breakfast untouched as he struggled to process how their private medical crisis had become entertainment for millions of strangers. "This isn't what we wanted," he told Sarah, gesturing at the television screen. "We just wanted help for Mom, not this circus." The attention brought unexpected consequences. A conspiracy theorist with a YouTube channel boasting 100,000 subscribers posted a video claiming that Rose's condition was evidence of government biological experiments on rural Americans. Within hours, the hospital began receiving calls from angry viewers demanding answers about what they're really doing to that poor woman. 3 protesters appeared in the parking lot with signs reading, "Stop Medical Experimentation" and "Free Grandma Rose." Sarah found herself fielding calls not just from reporters but from well-meaning strangers offering everything from home remedies to religious healing. A prosperity gospel preacher from Tennessee called to suggest that Rose's family needed to make a larger donation to his ministry for her healing to occur. A woman from Oregon insisted that Rose needed to be treated immediately with a combination of crystals and essential oils she was willing to ship overnight. "I don't understand how this got so big so fast," Sarah confided to Dr. Harrison during one of his visits to check on Rose. "Emma just wanted people to pray for her grandmother." Dr. Harrison, who had been struggling with his own crisis of confidence following the malpractice lawsuit, found himself oddly moved by the genuine care displayed by strangers for his patient. "Sometimes," he said thoughtfully, "the most inexplicable things bring out the best in people. Yes, there are those who want to exploit the situation, but look at this." He showed Sarah his phone, which displayed a GoFundMe page that Emma had never created. "Someone in Colorado started this to help with your family's medical expenses. They've never met you, but they've raised $12,000 because they care about your mother-in-law." The medical team's frustration grew as test after test yielded no answers. The Mark's tissue samples couldn't be analyzed because conventional biopsy needles couldn't penetrate its surface. Ultrasound revealed nothing. The mark appeared to absorb the sound waves completely. MRI scans showed a void where the mark existed, as if that portion of Rose's neck simply didn't exist in any measurable way. Dr. Martinez from oncology had initially suspected an aggressive form of melanoma, but the mark showed none of the characteristics of cancerous tissue. Dr. Walsh from dermatology had never encountered a skin condition that presented with such absolute uniformity and geometric precision. Even Dr. Sarah Kim, the infectious disease specialist brought in from Pittsburgh, found no evidence of bacterial, viral, or fungal involvement. "The strangest thing," Dr. Chen told her colleagues during their Wednesday evening consultation, "is that Mrs. Thompson shows no signs of distress, pain, or systemic illness. By every measure except for this mark, she's remarkably healthy for a woman her age. Her vital signs are better than most 60-year-olds I treat." Emma's social media presence had evolved from simple prayer requests to regular updates that were being followed by over 200,000 people across multiple platforms. Her Wednesday evening TikTok, filmed in the hospital room with Rose's permission, showed her grandmother teaching her to knit while connected to various monitoring devices. "Grandma says if she's going to be stuck in here, she might as well be productive," Emma narrated. "She's making mittens for the nurses." The video, which showed Rose's gentle hands working the knitting needles with practiced ease while the mysterious mark was clearly visible on her neck, went viral within hours. Comments poured in from viewers around the world, many sharing their own stories of elderly relatives who had faced medical mysteries with similar grace and dignity. But the attention also brought darker elements. Late Wednesday night, a man claiming to represent a pharmaceutical company offered Tom $50,000 for exclusive access to his mother for research purposes. When Tom angrily refused, the man suggested that the family might find themselves facing significant financial pressure if they continued to obstruct medical progress. Sarah couldn't sleep that night, her mind racing between worry for Rose and concern about the forces that seemed to be gathering around their family. She stood at the hospital room window, watching the news vans in the parking lot and wondering how a simple fall in their farmhouse kitchen had led to this surreal situation. "Can't sleep either?" Rose's voice was soft in the darkness. "I'm so sorry, Rose," Sarah whispered, moving to sit beside the bed. "This isn't what we wanted. We just wanted you to get better." Rose reached out and took Sarah's hand, something she'd rarely done in their 20 years as family. "Honey, I've been thinking about something all day. That maybe this isn't happening to me. Maybe it's happening through me, for a purpose we don't understand yet." Outside, Emma was live streaming to her followers, giving them a tour of the hospital's chapel, where dozens of people had left flowers, cards, and small tokens for Rose. "I don't know what's going to happen," she told her camera, "but I know that love is more powerful than fear, and right now, our family is surrounded by more love than I ever imagined possible." What none of them realized was that the real test of that love was still to come. Friday evening arrived with an ominous shift in Rose's condition that sent the entire medical team into high alert. What had been a medical curiosity transformed into a life-threatening crisis when Dr. Chen discovered a third mark during her routine evening examination, this one positioned directly over Rose's heart. Unlike the original mark on her neck, which had remained stable for 3 days, this new manifestation appeared to be growing. Within 2 hours of its discovery, the mark had expanded from the size of a quarter to nearly 3 inches in diameter. More alarming was its effect on Rose's cardiac rhythm. The heart monitors began displaying irregular patterns that made the nursing staff exchange worried glances. "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Harrison said gently, pulling up a chair beside her bed, "we need to discuss some difficult options. This new mark is affecting your heart function in ways we don't fully understand. We're recommending emergency surgery to address the situation." Rose's weathered hands smoothed the hospital blanket as she absorbed this information with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained throughout the ordeal. "Doctor, what exactly are you proposing to do?" Dr. Harrison exchanged glances with Dr. Chen before answering. "We would need to remove the affected tissue. It's a complex procedure, and I won't lie to you. Given your age and the location of the mark, the surgery carries significant risks. We estimate approximately a 30% chance of survival." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Tom, who had been pacing by the window, stopped mid-step and turned to face the medical team with an expression of raw anguish. 30%? That's it? That's all you can give us?" Sarah felt her knees go weak and sank into the bedside chair. 20 years of complicated family dynamics, of feeling like an outsider, of small conflicts and misunderstandings, none of it mattered now. All she could think about was losing this woman who had become more of a mother to her than her own mother had ever been. Emma, who had been live streaming to her followers throughout the week, forgot about her phone entirely. "Grandma, there has to be another option. There has to be something else they can do." Rose reached out and took Emma's young hand in her weathered one. "Sweetheart, sometimes we don't get the choices we want. We only get the choices we have." She turned to Dr. Harrison with remarkable composure. "Doctor, if I don't have the surgery, what happens?" "The mark appears to be interfering with your heart's electrical system," Dr. Chen explained carefully. "Without intervention, we expect your condition to deteriorate rapidly. Possibly within 24 hours. Tom slammed his fist against the window, his control finally cracking completely. "This is insane! A week ago she was making breakfast and hanging laundry, and now you're telling us she might die because of something that nobody understands?" His voice broke on the last words, and for the first time since his father's death, Tom Thompson began to cry. The sight of her son's tears did what no medical diagnosis could do. It finally broke through Rose's calm facade. "Oh, Tommy," she whispered, using the childhood nickname she hadn't spoken in decades. "Come here, son." Tom crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside his mother's bed, his broad shoulders shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for days. "I can't lose you, Mom. Not like this. Not when I never told you. When I never said—" "You never needed to say it, honey," Rose murmured, stroking her son's graying hair. "A mother knows." A mother always knows. Sarah watched this scene through her own tears, realizing that she was witnessing something she'd never seen in 20 years of marriage. Tom finally allowing himself to be vulnerable, to admit his need for his mother's love. The crisis was stripping away all the protective barriers they'd built around their emotions. "Rose," Sarah said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago." She took a shaky breath. "I'm pregnant." The announcement fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. Even Dr. Harrison and Dr. Chen, who had intended to leave the family alone to process their decision, remained frozen in place. "Pregnant?" Rose's eyes widened, then filled with a joy that seemed to illuminate her entire face despite the dire circumstances. "Oh, honey, how wonderful! How far along?" 8 weeks, Sarah admitted. "I found out last Monday, the day before all this started. I was going to tell everyone at Thanksgiving dinner. I wanted it to be special, but now—" She gestured helplessly at the monitors and medical equipment surrounding Rose's bed. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Mom, that's amazing. I'm going to be a big sister?" Despite the crisis, a genuine smile broke through her tears. "Grandma, you're going to be a great grandmother." Rose's eyes sparkled with unshed tears. "Lord willing, I'll get to meet this little one. Lord willing." She turned to the medical team with renewed determination. "Doctors, I've lived 82 good years. I've raised my son, helped raise my granddaughter, and now I find out there's another baby coming. If this surgery gives me a chance to hold my great-grandchild, then that's a chance worth taking." Dr. Harrison felt something tighten in his throat. In his decades of practice, he'd delivered countless diagnoses and witnessed numerous family crises. But there was something about Rose Thompson's quiet courage that reminded him why he'd chosen medicine in the first place. "Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that you'll have our best team. Dr. Patricia Williams is flying in from Johns Hopkins. She's one of the finest cardiac surgeons in the country." Outside the hospital room, the media attention had reached fever pitch. Emma's announcement of her grandmother's deteriorating condition had prompted an outpouring of support that surprised even the most experienced social media managers. "Pray for Grandma Rose" was trending worldwide, with celebrities, politicians, and ordinary people from 6 continents sharing messages of hope and encouragement. The hospital parking lot resembled a small festival, with hundreds of people holding vigil. Local churches had organized prayer circles. The Amish community from 3 counties over had arrived in their buggies, standing in silent solidarity, despite their usual avoidance of media attention. Food trucks had appeared to feed the growing crowd, and someone had organized a children's choir that sang hymns throughout the evening. But the attention also brought unwanted elements. A group calling itself Citizens for Medical Truth had arrived with bullhorns, claiming that Rose was being used for secret government experiments. Their leader, a man named Marcus Reed, who hosted a popular conspiracy podcast, conducted live broadcasts from the hospital steps, stirring up suspicion and anger among some of the gathered crowd. "They're telling you this is a medical mystery," Reed shouted into his microphone while his followers live-streamed to thousands of viewers. "But what they're not telling you is that this woman is being used as a test subject. Wake up, people!" This is how they experiment on our elderly. Security had to be increased when several of Reed's followers attempted to force their way into the hospital, claiming they were there to rescue Rose from medical persecution. The situation grew tense enough that local police established a perimeter around the building. Inside room 7, the family remained unaware of the chaos outside. Their world had narrowed to the beeping monitors, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the terrible weight of the decision they faced. Rose had agreed to the surgery, but the risks were overwhelming. Dr. Williams had arrived and spent 2 hours reviewing Rose's case, her expression growing more grave with each test result. "I won't lie to you," Dr. Williams told the family during her consultation. "I've performed thousands of cardiac procedures, but I've never operated on tissue that behaves like this. We don't know how the mark will respond to surgical intervention. It's possible that attempting to remove it could cause immediate cardiac arrest." Tom had stopped crying, his grief hardening into a desperate kind of determination. "Doc, if we don't do anything, she dies anyway, right? So, what choice do we really have?" "There's something else you should consider," Dr. Williams continued carefully. "Given the unique nature of your mother's condition, this surgery will likely be documented extensively for medical research. Her case will probably be studied for decades. Are you comfortable with that level of scrutiny?" Rose answered before anyone else could speak. "Doctor, if my situation can help other people, then document away. I've lived a good life, and if some good can come from whatever's happening to me, then that's the Lord's will." Emma had been unusually quiet during the medical discussions, but now she looked up from her phone with an expression of wonder. "Grandma, you need to see this." She showed Rose the screen, which displayed thousands of messages from around the world. "People are praying for you in languages I can't even identify. Look at this one. It's from a monastery in Tibet. And this one is from a group of nuns in Italy who are holding a special vigil." Rose studied the messages with amazement. "All these people who don't even know me, are taking time to pray for an old farm woman from Pennsylvania." "You're not just any old farm woman anymore, Grandma," Emma said softly. "You've become something else. You've become hope." As midnight approached, the family faced the longest night of their lives. Surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. and none of them expected to sleep. They took turns sitting with Rose, sharing memories and stories they'd never thought to tell before. The crisis had stripped away all pretense, all the small resentments and misunderstandings that had accumulated over the years. In the face of potential loss, they finally saw each other clearly, not as the roles they played within the family structure, but as people who loved each other despite their flaws and differences. Outside, the vigil continued under a star-filled sky, hundreds of strangers united in their concern for a woman most of them would never meet. Inside room 7, Rose Thompson closed her eyes and prayed not for herself, but for the strength her family would need to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Saturday morning arrived with the cruel indifference that only the worst days of our lives seem to possess. The pre-dawn hours had crawled by with agonizing slowness as the Thompson family maintained their vigil in Rose's hospital room. None of them had slept more than a few minutes at a time, and the emotional exhaustion showed in their hollow eyes and trembling hands. At 5:30 a.m., the surgical team began their preparations. Rose was remarkably calm as the nurses prepared her for the operating room, her silver hair tucked beneath a surgical cap and her weathered hands folded peacefully over the hospital blanket. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile than any of them had ever seen her. But her eyes still held that spark of quiet determination that had carried her through 8 decades of life's challenges. "I want you all to know something," Rose said as her family gathered around her bed one final time. "Whatever happens in there, I've had a blessed life. I got to love your father for 37 wonderful years. I got to raise the best son a mother could ask for. I got to see Emma grow into a beautiful young woman. And Sarah." She reached out and squeezed her daughter-in-law's hand. "I got to gain a daughter I never thought I'd have." Tom's composure, which had been holding by the thinnest of threads, finally snapped completely. "Mom, don't talk like this is goodbye. You're going to come through that surgery, and you're going to meet your great-grandchild, and you're going to live to see 100. "From your lips to God's ears, son," Rose whispered, but they all heard the doubt in her voice. The surgery was scheduled to last 4 to 6 hours, depending on what Dr. Williams discovered when she opened Rose's chest. The family settled into the surgical waiting room, joining the dozens of other families who faced their own medical crises. But unlike the others, the Thompsons found themselves surrounded by strangers, reporters, social media influencers, and curious onlookers who had somehow gained access to the hospital. Emma's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Her live stream from the night before had been viewed over 2 million times, and #Pray for Grandma Rose was trending in 12 countries. Messages of support poured in from celebrities, politicians, and ordinary people from around the world, but the attention felt overwhelming rather than comforting. "I think I made a mistake," Emma confided to her parents as they sat in the uncomfortable plastic chairs. "I just wanted people to pray for Grandma, but now it feels like we've turned her into a spectacle." Sarah wrapped an arm around her stepdaughter. "Honey, you did what love made you do. You wanted to help, and you did help. Look at all the people who are supporting us, who are holding us up when we don't have the strength to stand." But even as Sarah spoke these comforting words, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had lost control of their own story. Outside the waiting room windows, she could see the crowd that had gathered in the hospital parking lot. What had started as a prayer vigil had morphed into something that resembled a carnival, complete with vendors selling "Pray for Grandma Rose" t-shirts and conspiracy theorists with megaphones spreading wild theories about government experiments. 2 hours into the surgery, Dr. Williams emerged from the operating room with an expression that made Sarah's heart sink. The surgeon's scrubs were stained with blood, and her face carried the weight of someone who had just witnessed something that challenged everything she thought she knew about medicine. "We need to talk," Dr. Williams said quietly, leading them to a private consultation room. "The situation is more complex than we anticipated." Tom gripped Sarah's hand so tightly she winced. "Is she alive?" "She's alive, but barely," Dr. Williams said, sinking into a chair as if her legs could no longer support her. "When we opened her chest, we discovered that the mark had grown. It now covers approximately 60% of her heart muscle. Removing it would be impossible without removing most of her heart itself." Emma made a small, wounded sound. "So what does that mean? What can you do?" "We've done what we can to stabilize her, but—" Dr. Williams paused, struggling with words she'd never had to say before in her distinguished career. "I've never seen tissue behave like this. The mark isn't just on her heart. It appears to have replaced portions of the cardiac muscle. By all rights, she should be dead. Her heart shouldn't be able to function with this level of alteration." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah felt the room spinning around her, and she had to grip the arms of her chair to keep from fainting. The pregnancy hormones weren't helping her emotional stability, and the stress of the past week was taking its toll on her body as well as her mind. "How long does she have?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Williams met his eyes with the brutal honesty that her profession sometimes demanded. "Hours, maybe less. I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry." The next few hours passed in a blur of grief and desperate hope. Rose was moved to the ICU, surrounded by monitors that beeped with increasing urgency as her vital signs continued to deteriorate. The family took turns sitting with her, holding her hands, and whispering words of love that they prayed she could still hear. Outside, Emma made the hardest post of her young life. With tears streaming down her face, she looked into her phone's camera and told her followers the truth. "The doctors say Grandma Rose doesn't have much time left. I don't understand why this is happening, but I want to thank everyone who has prayed for us. Please keep praying. Please don't stop believing in miracles." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, thousands of people around the world were sharing their own stories of loss, their own prayers for the Thompson family, and their gratitude for Rose's quiet courage in the face of an inexplicable medical crisis. Religious leaders from multiple faiths posted messages of support. A children's hospital in St. Louis held a moment of silence. A group of firefighters in Oregon lowered their flag to half-staff. But for all the global attention, for all the prayers and good wishes, Rose continued to fade. Her breathing became labored despite the ventilator. Her heart rate, which had been erratic for days, began to slow dramatically. The ICU nurses, who had seen countless patients pass away, recognized the signs and gently suggested that the family consider saying their final goodbyes. At 3:47 p.m., exactly 7 hours after her surgery had begun, Rose Thompson's heart monitor showed a flat line. The steady beep that had accompanied her for days was replaced by the long, continuous tone that medical professionals know too well. Dr. Harrison, who had been monitoring her condition personally, checked for vital signs and found none. "Time of death, 3:47 p.m., he announced quietly to the assembled medical team. Tom collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands as years of unspoken words and unexpressed gratitude came pouring out in racking sobs. Sarah held Emma as they both cried, their grief echoing through the sterile corridors of the ICU. The nurses gave them space to mourn, dimming the lights and closing the door to provide what privacy they could in the midst of such public attention. For 4 minutes, Rose Thompson was clinically dead. Her family grieved beside her still form, holding her cooling hands and whispering their love into the silence. Emma's phone, forgotten on the bedside table, continued to buzz with notifications from followers around the world who somehow sensed that something had changed, that their collective prayers were needed now more than ever. Outside the hospital, the crowd of supporters seemed to sense the shift as well. The celebration atmosphere that had characterized much of the week faded into something more solemn. People linked arms and sang hymns. Children held candles despite the afternoon sunlight. Even the conspiracy theorists fell silent, as if the reality of Rose's mortality had made their wild theories seem suddenly petty and irrelevant. At 3:51 p.m., exactly 4 minutes after she had been pronounced dead, something impossible happened. The heart monitor, which had been showing the flat line of cardiac death, suddenly began to register a rhythm. Weak at first, then stronger, then surprisingly steady. Dr. Harrison, who had been preparing to disconnect the monitors, froze in disbelief. "That's not possible," he whispered, checking the connections and recalibrating the equipment. But the readings were consistent across all machines. Rose Thompson's heart was beating again. The miracle that thousands had prayed for had arrived in the darkest hour, when hope seemed lost forever. But as the family would soon discover, this was only the beginning of the revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about Rose, about their family, and about the mysterious ways that love can transcend even death itself. The revival of Rose Thompson's heartbeat sent shockwaves through the ICU that rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. Dr. Harrison stood frozen beside the monitors, his medical training warring with the evidence of his own eyes. In 35 years of emergency medicine, he had never witnessed a patient return to life after being clinically dead for 4 minutes without any intervention. "Check all the connections again," he ordered the nursing staff, his voice tight with disbelief. "Run a full cardiac panel. I want every possible explanation explored." But as the minutes passed and Rose's vital signs not only remained stable but actually began to improve, Dr. Harrison found himself confronting something that challenged the very foundations of his scientific worldview. The woman who had been declared dead was now breathing on her own, her heart beating with a rhythm stronger and more regular than it had been before the surgery. Tom, who had been sobbing into his hands just moments before, looked up at the monitors with red-rimmed eyes. "What's happening? Is she—" "She's alive," Dr. Harrison said simply, because there were no other words that could adequately describe what they were witnessing. "Her vital signs are not just stable. They're better than they've been since she arrived." Sarah felt her knees buckle with relief, so overwhelming it was almost painful. The emotional whiplash of losing Rose and then having her return was more than her pregnancy-stressed system could handle. Emma caught her stepmother as she swayed, both of them staring at Rose's peaceful face as if afraid that looking away might somehow break the spell. Within hours, word of Rose's revival had spread beyond the hospital walls. Emma's followers, who had been sharing messages of condolence and grief, suddenly found themselves witnessing what many were calling a genuine miracle. The hashtag Grandma Rose Miracle began trending alongside the original #Pray for Grandma Rose, and the hospital parking lot, which had grown somber during the afternoon, erupted in celebration. But the most profound revelation was yet to come. As Rose slowly regained consciousness over the following hours, she began to speak about experiences that would reshape everything her family thought they knew about her life. "I saw him," Rose whispered when she was finally able to speak, her voice barely audible but filled with a wonder that made everyone in the room lean closer. "I saw my John. He was standing at the edge of a beautiful meadow, and he looked just like he did when we were young." Tom squeezed his mother's hand gently. "Mom, you were dreaming. The anesthesia can cause vivid hallucinations." But Rose shook her head with surprising firmness. "No, son. This was different. John told me things I need to share with you, about why this happened, about what it means." Over the next several hours, as Rose's strength gradually returned, she began to reveal secrets that she had carried alone for 4 decades. The story she told challenged everything the Thompson family believed about their history, their identity, and the true circumstances of John Thompson's death. "Your father didn't die of a heart attack," Rose said quietly, her eyes fixed on some distant memory. "At least, not the way we told everyone. John had the same condition I have now. The marks, the medical mystery, all of it. It happened to him in 1980, just like it's happening to me now." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean, the same condition?" Rose's weathered hands smoothed the hospital blanket as she gathered the courage to continue. "The doctors back then were just as baffled as they are now. But John chose differently than I did. When they told him he could either submit to experimental treatments that would take him away from his family for months, possibly years, or he could spend his remaining time at home with us, he chose to come home." Tom stared at his mother in shock. "You're saying Dad had these marks too? And you never told me?" "He made me promise," Rose said, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "John said he didn't want you growing up afraid that you might inherit whatever was happening to him. He wanted you to live your life without that shadow hanging over you. The revelation hit Tom like a physical blow. His entire understanding of his father's death, his own identity, and his family's medical history crumbled in an instant. So, when you collapsed in the kitchen, when this whole thing started, you knew what was happening? Rose nodded slowly. I suspected. I hoped I was wrong, but when I saw that first mark, I knew. And I was terrified that I would leave you the way John left us, suddenly and without explanation. Emma, who had been recording everything for her followers throughout the week, found herself putting her phone down completely for the first time since the ordeal began. Grandma, if Dad had the same thing and he died from it, how are you still alive? This was the question that led to the most shocking revelation of all. Rose looked at each member of her family in turn, as if memorizing their faces, before speaking the words that would change everything. Because 40 years ago, your grandfather made a different choice than I made. When the experimental treatments failed, when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do, John chose to stop fighting. He said he'd rather die as himself than live as someone else's medical experiment. The room fell silent except for the quiet beeping of monitors. Sarah found herself holding her breath, sensing that Rose hadn't finished her story. But before he died, Rose continued, John made me promise something else. He said that if this condition ever appeared in our family again, the person who had it should choose life, no matter how difficult or frightening the path might be. He said that maybe, someday, someone would find answers that he couldn't find in 1980. Dr. Harrison, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward with an expression of profound realization. Mrs. Thompson, are you saying that your husband had the same marks, the same symptoms, 40 years ago? Not just the same symptoms, Doctor, Rose said. I still have his medical records, hidden them all these years because I was afraid of what people might think, what they might do to our family if they knew we carried some kind of condition. The implications of this revelation were staggering. If Rose's condition wasn't unique, if it had appeared in the same family 40 years earlier, then everything the medical team had assumed about her case would need to be reconsidered. More importantly, if John Thompson had survived for months with the same condition before choosing to stop treatment, it suggested that Rose's survival wasn't as miraculous as it seemed. It was evidence of some kind of genetic adaptation that the medical establishment had never encountered. Tom stood up abruptly, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and grief. So, you've been carrying this secret for 40 years? You let me spend my entire adult life believing that Dad died suddenly, that there were no warning signs, no chance to say goodbye? Tommy, Don't Tommy me, Tom said, his voice rising. Do you have any idea what I've been through? The guilt I've carried, thinking that maybe I could have done something, could have noticed symptoms, could have saved him somehow. Sarah reached for Tom's arm. Honey, she was protecting you. She was protecting all of us. From what? Tom demanded. From the truth? From understanding our own family history? Rose's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. From the fear, son. From the terrible fear that I've lived with every day for 40 years. The fear that this condition might skip generations, that it might appear in you or in Emma or in your new baby. The fear that our family was cursed somehow. Emma, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly looked up with an expression of dawning understanding. Grandma, when you came back, when your heart started beating again, did something change? Do you still have the marks? Everyone in the room turned to look at Rose's neck, where the original mark had been clearly visible for a week. In the drama of her revival, no one had thought to check whether the mysterious marks that had started this entire ordeal were still present. Dr. Harrison moved closer with a penlight, gently examining Rose's neck and chest. His expression shifted from curiosity to amazement as he conducted his examination. "They're gone," he said quietly. "The marks are completely gone. There's no trace that they were ever there." The room erupted in a mixture of celebration and confusion. If the marks had disappeared, what did that mean for Rose's prognosis? What did it mean for their understanding of the condition that had apparently claimed John Thompson's life 40 years earlier? But Rose herself seemed unsurprised by this development. "John told me," she said simply. "When I saw him during those 4 minutes, he told me that I had passed the test, that I had chosen courage over fear, love over self-protection. He said the marks would fade because I had learned what they were meant to teach me." As the implications of Rose's survival and recovery began to sink in, the Thompson family found themselves facing a new reality, one where miracles were possible, where love could indeed transcend death, and where the secrets of the past could finally be transformed into hope for the future. 1 month later, the Thompson farmhouse glowed with the warm light of Thanksgiving dinner preparations. The old kitchen, which had been the site of Rose's mysterious collapse just weeks before, now bustled with the happy chaos of 4 generations working together to prepare their most meaningful holiday meal ever. Rose stood at the counter where Sarah had found her that frightening Tuesday morning, her hands steady as she rolled out pie crust with the same wooden rolling pin her own grandmother had brought from Pennsylvania Dutch country. The mysterious marks that had baffled doctors and captivated the world were completely gone, leaving no trace except for the profound changes they had brought to her family's understanding of love, faith, and the precious nature of time together. "Grandma, you're supposed to be resting," Emma chided gently, though she couldn't hide her smile as she watched Rose work with the practiced ease of someone who had been making pies for 7 decades. "Dr. Harrison said you should take it easy for at least another month." Rose chuckled, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth that had nothing to do with the oven's heat. "Honey, I've been taking it easy my whole life. Now that the good Lord has given me a second chance, I intend to use every minute of it." She paused in her work to look around the kitchen, taking in the sight of her family working together in harmony for the first time in years. Besides, there's nothing restful about sitting around when there's so much living to do. Tom, who was carefully carving the turkey with his father's old carving set, looked up at his mother with eyes that still held traces of the wonder he'd felt watching her return from clinical death. The anger he'd initially felt about her 40-year secret had transformed into something deeper, a profound gratitude for the sacrifices she'd made to protect their family, even when those sacrifices had cost her decades of worry and loneliness. "Mom," he said, setting down the carving knife and wiping his hands on his apron, "I need to say something I should have said a long time ago." He crossed the kitchen and gently took Rose's flour-dusted hands in his own. "I love you, not just because you're my mother, not just because you came back to us when we thought we'd lost you forever, but because you're the strongest, most selfless person I've ever known." Rose's eyes filled with tears, the good kind of tears that come from joy rather than sorrow. "Oh, Tommy, I love you too, son, more than all the stars in the sky." Sarah, who was mashing potatoes while keeping one hand protectively over her growing belly, watched this exchange with a heart so full of gratitude she could barely contain it. The pregnancy was progressing beautifully, and Rose's miraculous recovery had transformed what might have been a difficult time into a celebration of new life and second chances. "I have an announcement," Sarah said, setting down the potato masher and turning to face her family. "The ultrasound yesterday showed that the baby is healthy and strong. And," she paused dramatically, savoring the moment, "we're having a girl." Emma squealed with delight, abandoning her green bean preparations to hug her stepmother. "A girl! Grandma, you're going to have a great-granddaughter." Rose's face lit up with pure joy. "A little girl," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "Oh, honey, that's the most beautiful news. Have you thought about names?" Tom and Sarah exchanged a meaningful look before Sarah answered. "Actually, we've decided to name her Rose. Rose Grace Thompson. We hope that's okay with you." The wooden spoon Rose had been holding clattered to the floor as she pressed both hands to her heart. For a moment, she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the honor of having her name carried forward to the next generation. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper. "I can't think of anything that would make me happier." The Thanksgiving table had been expanded to accommodate not just the immediate family, but also Dr. Harrison, who had become more than just Rose's physician over the past month. The crisis had forged unexpected friendships, and the doctor found himself genuinely grateful for an invitation to share this special day with people who had reminded him why he'd chosen medicine in the first place. As they gathered around the table, Rose insisted on saying the blessing, a tradition she had maintained for 50 years, but which carried special significance this year. They joined hands around the table, and Rose's voice, stronger and clearer than it had been in years, filled the dining room with words of gratitude that came from the depths of her heart. "Heavenly Father, we come before you today with hearts overflowing with thanksgiving. We thank you for this food, prepared with love and shared in joy. We thank you for this family, bound not just by blood, but by the choices we make to love and support each other through all of life's trials and blessings." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "We thank you for the miracle of second chances, for bringing me back to my family when they needed me most, and for showing us that love is indeed stronger than death, that faith can move mountains, and that sometimes our greatest trials become our most precious blessings." She paused, her eyes moving around the table to meet each beloved face. "We thank you for the new life growing within Sarah, for the promise of tomorrow that little Rose Grace represents. We thank you for Emma's generous heart that brought so many people together in prayer and support. We thank you for Tom's strength and devotion, and for Sarah's courage in choosing to love this sometimes difficult family." Dr. Harrison felt tears pricking his eyes as he listened to this simple, profound expression of gratitude from a woman who had every reason to be bitter or afraid, but who had chosen instead to focus on the blessings that had emerged from her trial. "And Lord," Rose concluded, "we ask your blessing on all those who prayed for us during our darkest hours. May they find in our joy a reminder that miracles do happen, that prayers are heard, and that no situation is too desperate for your love to transform. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen." "Amen," the family chorused, but they remained holding hands for a moment longer, reluctant to break the circle of love and gratitude that Rose's words had created. As they began to pass the dishes around the table, Emma looked up from her phone with a smile. "Grandma, your story is still helping people. I got a message today from a woman in Oregon whose grandmother is facing her own medical mystery. She said that seeing your courage gave her family hope." Rose nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I spent 40 years trying to protect this family by keeping secrets, by living in fear of what might happen. But sometimes, the best way to protect the people we love is to share our stories, to let others know they're not alone in their struggles." The meal continued with laughter, stories, and the comfortable conversation of people who had learned not to take their time together for granted. Outside, the November afternoon was crisp and clear, but inside the Thompson farmhouse, the warmth of love and gratitude created its own perfect climate. As the sun set over the Pennsylvania countryside, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, The Thompson family knew they had been blessed with something more precious than any treasure. They had been given the gift of truly appreciating each other and the wisdom to understand that every day together was a miracle worth celebrating. The bruise that had started their journey into fear had become the foundation for a new understanding of faith, family, and the mysterious ways that love can triumph over even the darkest circumstances. In choosing courage over fear, Rose had not only saved her own life, she had shown her family how to live fully, love deeply, and never stop believing in the possibility of miracles. Dear friends, Rose Thompson's incredible journey reminds us that our greatest trials often become our most precious blessings. At 82, when a mysterious mark appeared on her neck, Rose faced every senior's deepest fear, becoming a burden to family while battling an unknown health crisis. But what started as terror transformed into the greatest gift imaginable. A family reunited by love, secrets finally shared, and bonds strengthened by facing the unthinkable together. Rose's courage to choose hope over fear, to trust her family's love over her own worries about being a burden, gave her not just a medical miracle but something even more valuable: the joy of watching 3 generations come together in perfect harmony. Her story teaches us that it's never too late for second chances, for healing old wounds, or for creating new memories. Sometimes our scariest moments become the doorways to our deepest happiness. Rose discovered that being vulnerable with those we love doesn't make us weak. It makes us treasured. Every day above ground truly is a blessing, and every moment with family is a gift we should never take for granted. What family secret have you been carrying that might actually bring your loved ones closer if you shared it? Have you ever experienced a moment of crisis that ultimately strengthened your family bonds? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.